guys! So this video is on the paper by Ford, Grantham, and Harris titled Recruitment and Retention of Minority Teachers in Gifted Education. And my takeaways basically throughout the entire paper, I really like this paper just because we do talk a lot about the disrepresentation of minority students in the gifted programs, but we never really talk about minority teachers hardly at all. Even in my undergrad program that I'm still currently in, we don't ever talk about minority teachers, but we talk about a lot of what white educators can do in terms of multiculturalism aspect of like education in general. So it was really interesting, and they pointed out in the paper too how this is like one of the first studies and papers done about minority teachers in gifted ed. So I'm going to go overview and discussion. I want to kind of do them together just because I feel like that's the easiest way my brain flows. And so the main points, so this paper starts out by talking about the declining numbers of minority teachers. So basically, starting after World War II, the decline just immediately began. And they kind of contributed, so they talk a lot about in the very beginning where right after slavery, education is basically the only profession that African American people could take on after slavery, just because it wasn't, it was still segregated. Everyone had their own thing until the civil rights movement, obviously. But so basically, education was the only way that they could make a living, and so educated African Americans began teaching African American students as well, and that's where it kind of all began. And then since World War II, they said it started declining, and they give a few reasons as to why it declines, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. I really like the quote. It says, "Education for liberation, citizenship, and personal and collective power and advancement is like the ideologies of the Black community," and I think that's an incredible ideology, first off, that education can liberate you, can set you free, for citizenship, just like to be a productive member of society, and for power and advancement. And I'd like absolutely agree with that education is, that's how you get farther in life. That's how you gain your power over, like in your life, and advance your status, advance whatever you really want to, your place in life, anything. So they kind of pose the question, like, why the decline? Like, if this is, like, what African-American teachers believe, and this is their ideology, like, why is the decline still happening? And so they talk about recruitment factors, and this is kind of why the decline started coming. And so basically, other areas like STEM and business recruit harder than education because that's where the money is. And I see that at Georgia a lot. I came into the honors college at UGA as a special ed major, actually. And immediately honors was like, that is a weak profession. Biology, chemistry, business, these are the professions that like make the money. These are where you'll benefit most. And I was like, oh yeah, that like makes a lot of sense. I want to make money. And so I switched to biology for a year and hated it. And obviously I'm back, but I can definitely see how that is a recruitment factor, especially in minority teachers where, I don't know, like any teacher really, like the money is where a lot of people tend to go to, and there's just not a lot of money in education. Low college participation rate. So after high school, they graduate high school, and a lot of them just go into either technical colleges or like trade schools, trade jobs. And so low college participation rates in the education fields. So obviously there's a discord, like you can't teach if you don't have a degree. Low college graduation rates. So even if you do go into college as an education major, or it's any major, minorities have a greater rate of dropping out than their white peers, and that's kind of contributed to a lot of things, just like the white culture of universities today. Kind of the same thing we're talking about here, where there's a representation, like a lack of representation of Black and minority educators, and so they don't connect to the school, they don't connect to their experiences or their curriculum. Poor and negative experiences in K through 12 hinder the desire to go into education. So I can kind of see this for everyone, where if you have a bad experience growing up with your educators, like, you're not going to want to go into education, but especially with racism and microaggressions and all of these aspects that minorities also have to face on top of poor teachers, these can definitely impact their negative experiences, and, like, why would you want to go into a profession that has done so poorly to you? And then the last one, education relies heavily on testing and assessments for hiring purposes. Kind of going back to that, like, whitewashing of, like, the low college graduation rates. Basically, the GACE and CPA and all these things that you have to pass in order to be a certified teacher is all assessments, is all testing, is all money for testing, paid like $300 for the GACE or something ridiculous. But they kind of talk a lot about that, and where, like, it's whitewashed. It's culturally different than minority cultures, and so they don't do well on these assessments because they're not connecting, and they don't grow up knowing this culture, so they're being tested on culture and information, and there's just a discord on, like, what is actually happening. Saying kind of along those lines, retention. So if they do get into the field, how are they getting, a lot of teachers are dropping out. So it's like the first year, like 30-something% people drop out, and then between the first 5 years, probably around half teachers leave the profession. And so they talk about typically assigned, and minority teachers are typically assigned to SPED and low education classes and not gifted classes, because I personally feel that that's where a lot of the minority students are also assigned. And so even if they aren't SPED and they're not low education, they're very gifted students, they're typically seen as SPED just because of the cultural differences and the discord that I keep talking about. But they're assigned to it, and they're not assigned to gifted classrooms. And then gifted programs are less common in urban schools where most minority teachers are. So urban Atlanta, basically, if we're talking about Georgia, like, these schools aren't going to have the good gifted programs because they are Title I schools. They aren't properly funded. They aren't, there's just a lot of issues surrounding that school. But most minority teachers choose to teach here because that's where their community is, and that's where they feel like they can make the most difference. And that's where the students who look like them, grew up in their same culture kind of thing are. And so, but because there's no gifted programs, they can't teach gifted kind of thing. And then the high dropouts of the profession, like we talked about, and they kind of attribute it to the salary, the low salary, lack of parent, teacher, student support, and then influence of family members telling you, like, this isn't a good career for you, yeah. So 2 quotes I really found interesting through this article are on page 5 and page 6. So the first quote says, positive role modeling is crucial for ensuring commitment of minority youngsters to schooling. Without sufficient exposure to minority teachers throughout their education, both minority and majority students come to characterize the teaching profession and the academic enterprise as better suited to whites. So basically, students aren't going to choose the education field that they don't see their role models in. They don't see people like them. So it's a whitewash career, and people see it as a whitewash career because, like, students come to characterize, exactly what it says, students come to characterize the teaching profession as, only white females can do this. And then another philosophy, which I found really interesting, it says African American teachers hold a philosophy which seeks to achieve pride, equity, power, wealth, and cultural continuity among black children. Black teachers accomplish this goal by going up beyond the subject matter. They help black students to value achievement, as well as understand the personal value, the collective power, and the political consequences of academic achievement rather than failure. And I think that's a great ideology for all teachers to have, but especially African American teachers focusing on black students and having because they've been so discriminated against, they've been so put down, that they are holding these students up, like, no, like, education is power, and that you can gain so much from it, like collective power and the personal value and all that. So I really enjoyed that. And that was a great philosophy, and it makes complete sense in my head. So this is a video I found about the relationship. If it doesn't work, I want to post it in the link as well. So that video, sorry there was no sound, but you kind of got the gist with all the words, but basically just talks about how students are being affected by not having teachers as role models, not having teachers that look like them. And you saw it in the video, they're 3 times more likely to be put into gifted programs if there are Black educators, even educators who are just fighting for their intelligence and fighting for their right to have a gifted education. Okay. So implications to gifted education, how we can apply this. The more minority teachers are, the more minority students there are, what the video kind of pointed out. There's a quote on page 8 that says, since teacher referrals and recommendations play a role in the identification of gifted students, Ford has contended that white teachers may under-refer Black students for the gifted education program because of their cultural differences and related misunderstandings. And I definitely saw this in my placement last semester. I had it wasn't necessarily African-American students, but I had all ESOL students, and my teacher automatically just assumed that they're ESOL, they don't know English that well, they are special ed. And that's just her mindset. That is how she was born and raised. The cultural differences are there. They did not have her culture, so she assumed that they could not do school. I feel like that's what this is talking about, is that none of those students were ever thought of as gifted because they were so different from my teacher. So this is an article from the Atlantic.com, like a blog news source. And so the article said, why are there so few Black children in gifted education programs? And so it basically connects right back to the paper. Greater teacher diversity may help eliminate racial gaps, which in gifted programs, basically Black teachers fighting for Black students to get into those programs. And then it says schools, they suggest, can improve training for teachers tasked with identifying gifted students, explicitly encourage them to address tactic bias, raise awareness about prejudice and stereotypes that lead to inconsistent practices, or adopt a universal screening for gifted children. And so that's basically talking about the teachers that are already there. So training for teachers, so training them in these multicultural practices that we're talking about, and making sure that they understand that they are innately racist, that they have white supremacy, that they have just a power that they don't even recognize a lot of the times, so they can explicitly address their biases and help these students that they were innately discriminating against in order to get them into a better system for education. And so some recommendations that are previously implemented, they say that some forgiveness loans, mentoring programs, training and test-taking skills. So there's been some aspects of teachers coming out of how they can help them get into the educational system. And this posed a question why aren't these working as well? And they kind of go into it. What the article recommends for attention is that all of these things are good, but it needs to be more. So better loan forgiveness plans, 10% isn't going to cover it kind of thing.